Today I've got a build that may just look like your standard firearm setup, but it's actually using some very cool interactions to make the damage happen. I didn't feel like it was necessary to record that many demo fights since we all know how these types of builds look in action, but I wanted to take some time to fully explain what's going on here since, again, it's very cool and unique. This might be a little convoluted because every part of this build plays into the rest of it, so just bear with me for a minute here. So looking at the build, there are a couple things that are immediately different from most other Hugs builds out there, and I'll get to those in a minute, but we're going to start with the handgun. Corrupted Nebula is the linchpin of this build, and its unique capabilities are the foundation for all the other build choices. So what's special about this weapon is that the nanobots it creates from hitting weak spots are considered range damage and weapon hits. This means they benefit from range damage increases and range crit stats, but more importantly, they count as weapon hits from Corrupted Nebula even when it's stowed. And when we pair this with the momentum mutator, we get some interesting results. So an important characteristic of momentum is that all of its stacks are lost on weapon swap. So if you have any stacks of momentum, swapping weapons instantly erases all of them. There are some things that can deal damage while a weapon is stowed, like the normal Nebula's Nanoswarm or Enigma's Chaos Driver mod, but these aren't considered weapon hits and aren't capable of stacking momentum or other effects that require firearm damage. Corrupted Nebula is the only weapon in the game that breaks this rule, since the nanobots being considered weapon hits from Corrupted Nebula allows them to restack momentum after the stacks are lost from swapping to your long gun. So just demonstrate that real quick. I have my momentum stacked up, now it's gone, but now it's back. So why is it even worth doing this? Well, it turns out that momentum's buff isn't actually restricted to the weapon that it's on. So in every other case, having the stacks erased on weapon swap makes this irrelevant, but with Corrupted Nebula and only Corrupted Nebula, we can apply momentum's buff to our long gun while also using another mutator on the long gun itself, essentially letting us supercharge it with the benefits of two mutators at once. So speaking of the long gun, our long gun of choice is the plasma cutter. There's not really much to say here. It's just the strongest long gun by raw numbers thanks to its mod, but it's also the best user of the 1000 cuts mutator thanks to its large mag and high fire rate, and we need a weapon that makes good use of a mutator that isn't momentum because we're sticking that on Corrupted Nebula. Onto the trinkets. The most interesting item here is Onyx Pendulum. When it's fully stacked, it grants a 20% multiplicative increase to firearm damage, which is very enticing. In practice, though, it's not as incredible as it seems. I've tried many different builds trying to make this item work, and the main challenge that it faces is that stacking the damage increase for your main DPS tool requires spending time shooting with your other weapon. So you spend a lot of time shooting a weapon your build isn't focused on maximizing the damage output for. Corrupted Nebula once again breaks this rule since the nanobots being considered weapon hits and continuing to deal damage after the weapon is stowed allows it to stack Onyx Pendulum very quickly and maintain those stacks very easily. It also doesn't feel bad to pass on a crit amulet here like Abrasive Whetstone or Nightweaver's Grudge, because momentum is basically doing that for us and giving 20% crit chance and damage to Plasma Cutter. And this also means we don't need to worry about applying status or anything. For the rings, we've got Akari Warband and Probability Cord for even more crit on top of the 45% crit chance and damage from the double mutators. And with all buffs active, we're sitting at 87.5% crit chance and a 2.4x crit damage on the Plasma Cutter, with a final 20% multiplicative damage increase on top from Onyx Pendulum. For the rest of the rings, Leaking Gemstone is here for better uptime on Plasma Cutter's mod, and the final ring slot goes to Devoured Loop. So Plasma Cutter and Corrupted Nebula are both great at Devoured Loop crit fishing, since they both deal many instances of damage very quickly. Corrupted Nebula in particular is just great at this, since the nanobots stick around even after you stop shooting to continue scoring hits, and benefiting from range crit chance makes them crit very consistently. Proccing Devoured Loop so consistently allows us to take Gunslinger Prime instead of Hunter, since we'll get the permanent mark uptime through skill resets instead of Hunter's Prime perk, while also getting permanent uptime on Bulletstorm on top of the free reloads and infinite ammo from Loaded. Being ammo hungry, extremely ammo hungry, is the one weakness of the Plasma Cutter, and the Devoured Loop skill resets are kind of the final piece of the puzzle that really brings this build together. Your relic is whatever you want. I just have Profane Heart because it's set and forget. And the relic fragments are going to be crit chance, range crit damage, and then your choice between fire rate and weak spot damage. I personally prefer the fire rate because you're never hitting 100% weak spots, and the faster fire rate also accelerates the stacking of 1,000 cuts, but really it's up to you. For the traits, there isn't really anything special going on here, but Flashcaster is mandatory because we'll be casting skills a lot. Chakra extends the duration of Plasma Cutter's mod, and Spirit helps generate more mod power for better uptime on it. Footwork is always incredible on firearm builds, especially ones that are using bullet hose weapons like the Plasma Cutter, and Swiftness is just something that feels so good to play with that I really can't play without it at this point. The main other thing to note here is that we don't invest in any skill cooldown or duration at all, because we're using Devoured Loop to reset their cooldowns, and we want to be recasting frequently anyway for the instant reload and infinite ammo. The 10 points I have in Affliction are only there in case I feel like applying Corroded with Tainted Blade, so feel free to reallocate those into whatever you want. So that was a lot of explanation for what ends up looking and playing almost identically to your run-of-the-mill Hug setup, but I wanted to take the time to highlight Corrupted Nebula and its unique capabilities, since most people seem to view it as purely a mod spam DPS tool, but it can do a lot more than that. Hopefully this was somewhat interesting and informative. I really encourage you to try this out, and because it's very fun. And yeah, enjoy.